Yes, the landmark tends to land people there.
Yes. Well, let's start. Okay, so I'm very pleased today to be introducing Huckleberry Hax, who gave a wonderful interview earlier in the week and also showed his fantastic machinima film, STÖMOL. And today, Huck is going to be reading from his works. So welcome everyone, welcome Huck, and please take it away.
Thank you, Saffia. Good to see people here again. I thought long and hard about what to read today, and I decided that I'd try and get through a couple of my short stories. And recently, as we talked about in the interview on Monday, I have started podcasting some of these stories, which is a new experience for me and quite fun, if frustrating at times. So I'm going to read first of all the first of those stories. I should explain, the stories are called the Avatar Dining Club Mysteries, and it concerns a group of people in real life who get together in real life, but they are all avatars in the virtual world. So they get together every month for a meal, and this is all explained in the story that I'm about to read because it's the first one. So that story is available to listen to also as episode 1 of my podcast. But the podcast first series will just be going up to the 6th story. So I thought then what I'd do for the second part is read one of the stories that isn't going to be part of that series, and maybe if I do a season 2, will be kind of one of the stories from that. So you'll get one of the stories, and the reason why I'm going with the first story first of all is because it kind of sets the scene and make the other story make a bit more sense. If you are interested in listening to other stories on the podcast, I'll just quickly whack a URL into chat. Otherwise, I'll get told off for not being self-promotional enough. So there you go. That's my podcast. That's the page that has all of the episodes so far. There's a new episode released every Tuesday, so there's 2 more episodes to go, and they're released. I think it's about 1 p.m. SLT. That happens each week. So I'll get stuck in. So the first story is called Out. That's out spelt ALT. Wanted, real life drivers of virtual avatars for over dinner conversation. It was unusual for me to be reading a newspaper, far less a local one, and much less still its personals. A delayed train, a weak phone battery, and a discarded copy of the record on the bench next to me, however, and no other reading material to hand, left me with few other choices. Are you local to Basingstoke? Are you active in the metaverse? As it happened, I was both. I'm looking to create a dining club for 6 to 8 residents, meeting monthly, for good food and stimulating conversation. I liked the idea immediately. Ring Edward, it said. I made a note of the contact number on the back of my hand. A day's work later, I noticed the fading numerals, and the memory returned as it had with each successive hand wash of the day, only then to evaporate as I stepped out of the men's room and let the business of the moment back into my thoughts. 2 more washes, and it would be gone for good. I rang the number and asked for Edward. Ah, said a gruff but sculpted voice at the other end. You're ringing about the advert. Very good. Now, before you say another word, there's a very important rule that I intend all members should follow, always assuming, of course, that you choose to become one. The rule is, you must never refer to your real-life name during conversation. That includes the conversation we're having right now. Am I clear? expanded on his rules at the start of our very first dinner, some 3 weeks later. Edward was an imposing man, tall and elderly, but with an ageless vitality. He sat at the head of the table, and the 6 of us fell naturally into position, 3 to each side. Whilst the wine was being poured, he tapped his fork against an empty glass and waited with a smile for us to turn. "My friends," he started, "I've greeted each of you individually, of course. I wish to say just a few more words to mark the start of our acquaintanceship. After that, there will be no more standing to occasion, I promise." "He's a bit eccentric," the woman to my right whispered. We'd exchanged a hello of sorts when we sat down. "I like eccentric people," I murmured. "They don't waste mental capacity worrying about what others think of them." "Well, that must be nice," she said. The rules were established thus. Absolutely no real-life information was to be shared. Avatar names were to be used at all times. It was up to individuals how much of their metaverse identity they shared, and pseudonyms could be used if they didn't want to share anything at all. Everything spoken at the table was in the strictest confidence. Finally, it was recommended that none of us meet up in world in order to prevent the formation of cliques. These policies agreed, we next introduced ourselves. The woman to my right, Mary Ann Middlemarch, was a fashionista blogger, as was the middle-aged man immediately opposite me, though he introduced himself in the first instance as a photographer. When pushed for a name, he winced a little and checked that everyone agreed on the confidentiality policy. We all nodded vigorously. "I appreciate the option to come under a false name," he said, "but what on earth would be the point if I just made stuff up? Very well, my name in world is Jennifer Bitt. I play a female avatar, and hardly any of my virtual friends know I'm actually male." Edward rubbed his chin for a moment about this. Meanwhile, the man to my left, who had introduced himself as Raw Concrete and a builder in the metaverse, asked Jennifer, "So what are you? Gay? Bi? Transgender?" "None of the above," replied Bitt a little stiffly. "You are most welcome here, Jennifer," said Edward, before further comment could be made. "Please feel free to adopt whichever gender role you feel most comfortable with." That left club owner and skin designer Indigo Williams to Edward's left, a young woman with purple hair, yellow lipstick and black fingernails. She actually did look a bit like an avatar. And Rainy September to Jennifer's left, who declared that she did nothing at all in the metaverse except explore new places and party. I, of course, introduced myself as a writer. "And what," asked Leonard, "do you write about, Leonard?" "Anything in the metaverse that takes my fancy," I replied, hoping that sounded grandiose. In fact, I didn't really want to go into the details because people's eyes generally start to glaze over when a writer they've never heard of starts talking about their work. I consider it an important quality as a writer to recognise that. "And what do you do, Edward?" asked Mary Ann. "I roleplay," he answered, "which makes me similar to Leonard because roleplay involves a lot of writing. But it also makes me similar to everyone around this table, since we are all, are we not, remaining in roles we have meticulously created." "Right," Jennifer said, and nodded her agreement. "Speak for yourself," said Rainey. "How I am in world is no different from how I am in real life." "You're an explorer in real life, then?" I asked her. "Careful now," said Edward sharply, pointing his index finger at each of us. "That question leads to real-life discussion. If that happens, I will simply get up and leave, and it will be the last you ever see of me. Sorry to be so dramatic, Rainey, my dear," he continued more gently. "I don't doubt for one moment that how, for example, you treat people is no different in the metaverse than it is out here. I would hope that that's broadly true of everyone around this table. But that's not really what I mean by role. Perhaps identity would have been a better word." The food came, and for a moment the conversation went quiet. Presently, Edward commented, waving theatrically as he did, a forkful of roast beef in the air. So what I want for us to do, friends, is to discuss metaverse issues, to chew the fat over its unique curiosities, to keep each other's counsel. A council of avatars? I asked. A dining club, Edward asserted. Nothing more. Would that make us a fraternity? Said Indigo, speaking from the lip of her wineglass. It would make us a dining club, replied Edward. In any case, commented Raw, who was clearing his plate with alarming efficiency, fraternities are men only. Historically, said Indigo, there's no reason I can see why a male-female organisation with similar aims couldn't exist. Not today. Maybe not, said Raw. But then you'd have to call that something else. What would you call it, Mr. Concrete? Jennifer asked. Raw actually tore his eyes from his dinner plates for a moment to consider the question. Fraternity, fraternity, biternity, I don't know. Is that with an I or with a Y? Indigo asked. How the hell should I know? He replied, his attention now well and truly back on the pizza he had ordered. Ask someone who's not dyslexic. In any case, said Edward, it just makes us a dining club. Raw said, well, since the subject of identity came up earlier, I have a metaverse puzzler that's been playing on my mind the last couple of days. He flicked an olive to a gathering pile at the side of his plate and carved himself out an enormous rectangle of pizza, which he then proceeded to fold in two. Why did you order olives if you don't like them? Rainey asked him. By themselves, they're diabolical, he replied. But I like the way they make the cheese taste. Share with us your problem, please, said Edward. Perhaps we might, collectively, be able to shed some light on it. Well, it's not really a problem as such, Raw said through his mouthful. I just can't figure it out. You see, I got outed as an alt the other day, and I can't work out what gave me away. You have an alt? Asked Rainey. Raw looked at her. You don't? Absolutely not. She looked down at her plate quickly and skewered a carrot. Well, good for you. I do. So who called you? Indigo asked. A friend I have in both circles, Raw replied. But there are only 4 or 5 in that overlap. As Raw, almost all my time is spent building. My alt's my off-duty avatar, and I mostly mix with other people when I'm using it. And your friend didn't tell you what gave you away? Nope. He flicked another olive to one side. She told me not knowing would be my punishment for not having told her who I was. Good for her, Rainey commented. Bad for me, Concrete retorted. It's driving me nuts. Why didn't you tell her? Asked Mary Ann, who I noticed at this point had hardly started her turkey salad. Why should I? Raw demanded. What I do in the metaverse is my own business. It's not like I'm partnered or anything. Who has the right to know? In any case, he continued, I don't even have these people in my friends list in my out account. They just happened to be in the places I've visited as him. But they were on your list in your primary account, I said. Oh, sure. And Lily's one of my oldest pals. Why didn't you just lie when she asked if it was you? Asked Indigo. That's what I would have done. In the first place, replied Raw, she didn't ask, she stated. He paused to swallow. In the second, not telling her and actively denying the claim are 2 different levels of lie. I could live with a lie by omission, but telling her she was wrong when she was right would be diabolical. Even so, said Jennifer quietly, you still have the right to privacy. Indigo swirled her wine glass in the air thoughtfully for a moment. Perhaps it was what you were wearing that gave you away. Do you shop in the same places for both your avies? Yes, I was wondering the same thing, Mary Ann commented. I haven't bought a new outfit for Raw in at least a year. The builder carved up the remaining half of his pizza into 3 precisely equal slices. What do I want clothes for? And you're out? Asked Mary Ann. I buy for him all over the place. I don't shop, he added, forming the air quotes with his temporarily foodless cutlery. I think up what I want to look like, and then I hunt the look down in web stores. I don't care where I get it from, so long as it looks like what I want it to look like. I can't bear all the standing around in metaverse shops just to see if there's something I like there. Typical man, said Indigo, and got nods of approval from Mary Ann, Rainey and Jennifer. Raw just shrugged. Okay, so forget about the actual clothing, she continued. What about your skin and shape? If you hate experimentation, did you just stick with what you knew when you created the new avatar and buy those again before you got going on creating an outfit? Raw thought about that for a moment, chewing whilst he did. Now that you mention it, I think I did buy the same brand of shape and skin when I created him as what I was used to, though definitely not the same specific products. Doesn't make any difference though. I've changed both at least twice since then. I haven't worn those for at least a couple of years. Hairstyle, said Mary Ann. Good quality hair in the metaverse is so much harder to find for men than it is for women. Do you use the same hair on both avatars? A woman would definitely notice that. Well, you're right about it being hard to find anything worth wearing, Raw said, but it's not like it's impossible. Raw wears blonde dreadlocks. My out has 4 or 5 different styles he alternates between, none of which are dreadlocks. Are they all the same designer, though? I don't think so, he replied, and shoveled more pizza into his mouth. I bet it's your animation overrider, wagered Jennifer. Guys use about 3. You're either a foot-to-foot, or a jiggler, or a crotch clutcher. Concrete dismissed all this immediately. In the first place, I dispute your claim. There's loads of good AOs out there for men, though I know the sort of thing you're talking about, and the crotch one is diabolical. I didn't say there was an absence of choice, grumbled Jennifer, just an absence of choosing. In the second place, Raw continued, I use completely different animation sets for my 2 accounts. My building avatar has to remain still whilst I work. If he moves around in front of small things I'm editing, it drives me mad. Well then, it has to be something about the way you write, I said, pleased to be owning the query concerning words. The way you say stuff, or the type of vocabulary you use. Actually, I did think about that, Raw replied, waving his fork at me whilst he spoke so that a mushroom slice fell onto the tablecloth next to my plate of ravioli. I generally tend to choose pasta when eating out with people I don't know very well. It's just a safer option. The thing is, when I'm working as Raw, I really don't chat all that much, and when I do, I tend to talk technical stuff related to building. My building, my friend's building, builds I've seen, and so on. It's not that I never chat informally, but it just doesn't happen all that much. Now, in my alt, on the other hand, I'm much more sociable. Well, the whole point of creating him in the first place was to have more fun. I'd even go so far as to say I forced myself to take part more in local chat. It's a completely different interaction. What about your emoting style? Indigo asked. Chat is one thing, but emotes can reveal your style much more clearly. Unless you're a writer. She looked at me on this word, and I could swear she was dangling almost invisible quote marks around it. It's like a fingerprint. Simple, he replied. I never emote as Raw. I'm guessing you don't use voice in both accounts either, said Mary Ann. That would be too obvious. I don't use voice in either, Raw said, with a grimace. I wasn't convinced by his dismissal of my point about writing style and said so. It has to be that, I insisted. It's just something you're not aware of. Maybe you're right, he said, but I'm telling you, I talk in 2 completely different styles in there. Well, I still think it's something you were wearing, said Indigo. Maybe you don't consciously shop in the same places, but you could still have ended up wearing the same label. If so, then it was a complete coincidence, Raw replied. And in any case, what if I was? Plenty of guys must go around wearing the same designer as others. It's too slim a connection, and she was definite. All the obvious ideas depleted, the conversation suddenly lulled. I looked at our host, who had been taking in the whole thing, with a large, satisfied smile on his face. What do you think, Edward? He leaned towards me. What I think, my dear fellow, is that this little idea of mine has already exceeded my best expectations. We must make this a regular occurrence. We must. Just a shame nobody could solve my problem, Raw said, and commenced his assault upon the final slice. Our host put down his cutlery and dabbed at the side of his mouth with his napkin. Well, perhaps I might be able to help you there. Edward, don't go and tell us you've gone and worked it all out whilst we've all been making fools of ourselves, said Indigo, smiling for the first time that evening. Hardly fools, my dear, said Edward. All very helpful lines of inquiry, I assure you. I must agree with Leonard, however, that the most likely clue would have to be something said. Fine, said Raw, but what? Something, a single word perhaps, which you might use as the situation demanded in both social conversation and discussions about building. Like I said, protested the builder, I can't think of anything. Edward smiled. We are so rarely aware of our own mannerisms. Did you know, my boy, that on 3 separate occasions this evening you've used the words diabolical to indicate your disapproval of something? One could just as easily describe a building as diabolical as a behaviour or predicament. Raw's fork, with its final mouthful of pizza, stopped halfway to his mouth. Diabolical, he repeated. I do like that word. Really? You think that could be it? Oh, come on, said Rainey. That's even more tenuous than the branded clothing. It's not like he said it every other word. Indeed, said Edward, except we're not actually talking about a word that ever has been said in the metaverse by our friend here. As he told us a few moments ago, his communication in the metaverse is typed, not spoken aloud. He removed a ballpoint pen from his jacket and handed it to Raw with an unused paper napkin. Be a good chap and write it down for me, would you? Raw frowned. Well, he said, I'll have a go, but you really should be asking someone who's not dyslexic. Ah, I said, watching. The word itself, said Edward to Rainey, would indeed probably only arouse at best a mild suspicion, but if there was something else about how the person wrote that word. He held up the napkin on which was written diabolical, D-I-A-B-O-L-I-C-L-E. That's not how you spell it, is it? Raw said, miserably. I'm afraid not, my boy, Edward replied, but it would scarcely matter in the vast majority of contexts. And I have to agree with you completely that it is a very fine word indeed. So that was out. That was alt out. That's the first story of the Avatar Dining Club, and as I said earlier on, the first episode of the of season 1 of my podcast with those stories. So that was a story which I was asked to write a story. Just taking a glass of water. I was asked to write a story for someone's blog, and that's what led to that story. I wanted to write. I was inspired by Isaac Asimov's Black Widower stories, which were kind of mysteries solved around a dining table, again on a kind of a once a month kind of club meeting. And I wanted to just use some of these little kind of ideas that I'd had for little SL quirks, to put them into stories, and to create something that was perhaps a little bit more gentle than some of the fiction that I was writing at the time. Just reading Adele's point there. Ah, interesting. I'd never even thought of that. I might have to steal that, Julie, for a future Avatar Dining Club mystery. Nice little piece of detective work there. Okay, so that was like going to be a one-off, but then I enjoyed writing the story so much that every now and again I wrote I wrote a new one as I kind of thought up new little Second Life twists. And what happens from the second story onwards is that they start bringing in guests because this is what happened in Asimov's Black Widower tales. But to kind of keep it sort of virtual, the guest is brought in on a laptop. So what happens is they continue to meet on a monthly basis, and they and one of the regular members of the club brings a guest, and the guest attends via a laptop. So this, of course, is all before Zoom took over the world, and they kind of bring their own little problem for the group to solve. So the next story I'm going to read is the seventh story, and this is so this will be episode 1 of series 2 if I do record the second series of podcasts, which I probably will because I had quite a lot of fun doing the first one. This story is called the Vanishing Table. For the 7th meeting of the Avatar Dining Club, our Christmas meal, there was no avoiding it any longer. It was finally my turn to bring a guest. Whilst the rule established over the previous 5 meetings was that these diners attended virtually via a remote connection to a laptop placed in the empty spot at the end of the table, I decided to thumb my nose at this and actually bring someone physically with me. I liked that this appeared an act of rebellion, though in truth the reason was that I happened to know that Deadly Number lived about a 5-minute walk from our regular venue, the Labero Verde, and the idea that we should go to all the trouble of setting up a video conference with someone who was just around the corner struck me as being plain bonkers. Not that any of the regular group could know this. Real-life information was strictly prohibited in our monthly meetings, at which everyone remained at all times, guests included, in their virtual world persona. But I will tell you that Deadly was an old-school friend of mine, one of the small handful I'd bothered to stay in touch with over the years. He was also the person who'd first introduced me to the metaverse, hence my knowing him in both worlds. Apparently, it being Christmas Eve meant that spoken hellos were no longer sufficient a greeting, and suddenly everyone was hugging and kissing each other. Being a steadfastly hug-averse individual, I was initially horrified at this turn of events, and rather stiffly returned the embraces of Indigo Williams and Mary Ann Middlemarch. I must admit, however, that feeling rainy September in my arms was a surprisingly pleasant experience, and for some time after her lips had pressed against my cheek, I found myself wondering if there might be any way of repeating this event without having to wait another 12 months. Once we'd sat, pulled the crackers laid out for us, donned our paper hats, read the terrible jokes, and compared the dreadful gifts, I got the red curly fish thing, which decreed me to be passionate. Jennifer Bitt made a grand announcement. Seeing as how we're all physically here today, she said, and seeing as how it's Christmas, I thought I'd bring a board game for us to play once we've finished eating. She pulled out of a bag a well-worn Monopoly box. Raw Concrete, the young metaverse builder who always sat to my left, nearly spat his cola out across the table. Meanwhile, Edward, our white-haired and usually very genial host, looked quite aghast at this prospect. "My dear Jennifer," he said hoarsely, "have you lost your mind? The staff here do have homes to go to tonight, and I really don't want to see the side of anyone here that presents itself whilst playing that monstrosity of a game." "Well, it's either that or snakes and ladders," she said, pulling a second box out of her bag. "Snakes and ladders!" cried everyone. Everyone, that is, except for my companion. "What a shame," he said. "Great game, Monopoly." I happen to know that Deadly was an avid board games player in both worlds. "So I have to ask," said Indigo, as our food started to arrive, "what is the Deadly Number?" Deadly smiled at what was clearly a question he'd been asked many times before. "It all depends," he said, "on what number it is you need to roll, or what number it is you need someone else not to roll." "Deadly's into board games," I said, by means of by means of explanation. Though when you think about it, he added quickly, there are plenty of instances in our wider existence where life or death itself all boils down to a number. Like Russian roulette, Raw chipped in. Which chamber has the round? Precisely. Still a game, said Indigo, albeit one played by dumb... Perhaps this is an excellent opportunity, Edward cut in quickly, for you to tell us about your virtual world activity, Deadly. You play board games in World? Not just play them, he told us. I make them. Deadly number board games. I'm surprised you haven't heard of me. My slogan is dice, table, roll. Actually, that's the phrase I use to commence every game in World when I'm playing. It sort of became my thing. Catchy, said Rainey, putting no effort whatsoever into her feigned enthusiasm. I think so, he replied. Well, it hasn't hurt my sales. I shift on average 50 games per week, and my lowest price title is just shy of 500 in cost. Really? She said, suddenly interested now. People are that into board games in the virtual world? Jennifer asked, slightly incredulous. Why not? Deadly replied. They're a tried and tested way of bringing people together in real life. Why shouldn't that work in the metaverse too? People form connections with each other over board games. When you import them into the virtual world, you create a metaverse experience that comes really close to real life, especially if you have voice turned on whilst you're playing, so you can talk to one another. I never thought of it like that, Rainey said, and I found myself slightly irked by how quickly Deadly had captured her attention. I must confess, said Mary Ann, who was sitting to my right, I play board games in World from time to time. They're a lot of fun. There you go, he declared. Don't knock it till you've tried it. And what sort of board games do you create? Edward asked him, a forkful of turkey and stuffing pausing momentarily on its journey to his mouth. Well, if it involves dice, then I've probably created it. Ludo, backgammon, Yahtzee, snakes and ladders, Cluedo. I used to do a version of Monopoly based on popular metaverse regions, but I had to update it so frequently I gave up in the end. Raw asked him, you animate the dice and everything? Absolutely. Actually, that sort of thing is the easy part. The hardest thing to code is the listening scripts for when a player has to make a decision in chat. Like, for example, in Cluedo, when you have to announce who killed the victim in what room and with what weapon. That's a lot of work. First to work out the logic, and then to optimize the algorithm so the code isn't so long it lags out the whole region. I might need to talk to you about that, Raw said. I have to write a listening script for a guest book someone commissioned me to build. I'd be delighted, Deadly replied. I'll give you 2 pointers right now. First, don't have the thing listening all the time. It consumes resources and increases lag. Get the user to click on it before it starts listening. Second, once it's working, then clean up your code. You're going to be creating all sorts of backdoors along the way so you can check the various states. Get rid of them when they're no longer needed. It drives me nuts how many coders leave their over-bloated devices permanently in listening mode, slowing everything down around them. It's just lazy programming. Well, this is all very festive, Indigo said, her eyes half closed. Perhaps you should tell everyone your problem, Deadly, I said. That might liven things up. We do like a good mystery to get our heads around here. Oh yes, Raw cried eagerly. Edward rolled his eyes slightly, but this time declined to deliver his "we are not a mystery-solving group" speech. Oh well, Dudley said, looking faintly embarrassed. It's not exactly a mystery of the solving kind, just a mystery to me, really. I can't imagine it's going to be of any interest to you guys. We'll be the judge of that, Raw declared. Let's hear it. The young man was already halfway through his Christmas pizza, a bizarre toppings arrangement of turkey, sausage slices and sprouts. He waved his current slice enthusiastically in the air as he commanded our guest to speak. Well, it's just that I've lost something that I put out in my in-world house. A table. I raised it a couple of months ago, and last week I discovered it had completely vanished. A missing inventory item, Indigo said, deadpan. How thrilling. You must be desperate to write that into one of your stories, Leonard. Ignore her, Rainey said to him. That must have been very frustrating for you, Deadly. It's especially annoying, he continued, because I'm hosting a Christmas lunch at my place tomorrow for me and my other single friends. When he said the word single, he looked briefly in Rainey's direction. I'd hoped to use it. Of course, I've plenty of other tables in my inventory I could res, but I bought this one specially for the event because there's lots of great animations. A table with animations, eh? Indigo said. Now you're talking. Our guest blushed slightly. Not those sorts of animations, he clarified. Oh, she said glumly. Sad emoji. Is that a thing now? Jennifer asked, naming emojis. Why not? Deadly brings real-life board games into the virtual world. I bring online communication aids into the real one. What animations did it have? Rainey asked, smiling at our guest. Kissing under the mistletoe, perhaps? Yes, actually, I think it does have that one, Deadly replied. And also pulling crackers, guffawing with laughter at the jokes, and carving the turkey. Also, if you type in the name of a Christmas carol it recognises, it plays the first verse so you can all sing along. So it just disappeared, Raw said. Sounds like you just took it back into inventory by accident. I've checked and double-checked and triple-checked, Deadly told him. It's not there. I found the folder it came in. The instructions are there, the landmark to the story is there, and the picture of what it should look like is there. What is not there is the table. Not copyable, huh? Indigo commented. Gotcha item? Indeed, he replied, and it's a rare, so it's not like I can easily buy a replacement. A thought occurred to me. It was definitely yours, I asked him. It didn't belong to a friend who resed it for you and then took it back again. Maybe you just forgot. Rainey tutted. Leonard, if it wasn't his, then how did the folder get into his inventory? Oh yes, I replied quietly. There is that, I suppose. Then you must have deleted it, Indigo stated. There's no other explanation. Look in your deleted items folder. Nobody ever bothers to empty that. I guarantee you it'll be there. I already did that, Deadly replied, and it isn't. Actually, said Raw, there is another explanation. You must have given someone permission to edit your stuff, and they accidentally deleted it. That would explain everything. There are only 2 people in world that I've given that permission to, and they both swear blind they've not been anywhere near my place in the last couple of weeks. They're probably lying, Indigo said. You shouldn't believe a word of what anyone ever says to you in that place. I learned that lesson the hard way. At our previous meal, Indigo had found out that her long-term business partner in the metaverse had secretly manipulated her into their arrangement. Or, said Raw, someone hacked into their account. Why would anyone who hacked into a metaverse account bother to delete some other person's furniture? Asked Rainey, and then just stop at one piece. How should I know? The builder replied. People do all kinds of crap that makes no sense to me. In any case, Deadly said, I checked my security logs and no one entered my place during the time that the table must have disappeared. But if they had edit rights, Raw continued, what's to stop them from deleting their entry from the security log? The security system is set to owner edit only, Deadly replied. Edit rights or no edit rights, no one can interact with that system but me. Raw looked suddenly smug. I'm surprised that someone as accomplished as you at scripting should make such a rookie error. The menu might be owner only, but someone with edit rights could still look inside the log. It's only a text card. Deadly sighed. I'm sorry, Raw, but you're on the wrong track. I wrote that system myself, and the log is held on my Google Drive, so I don't have to be in world to check it. There's just no way that anyone could have changed it. Raw's triumphant smile disappeared. Oh, he said. I once lost something by accident, Marianne said. I was placing a sofa and I clicked on a vase by mistake whilst in edit mode. The next thing I knew, the stupid thing had shot up into the air out of view. I don't know what I did. I was searching for days for the damn thing. In the end, I found it 1,000 metres above my skybox. Yes, said Deadly, I've had that sort of thing happen to me a couple of times before. I think it's that the surprise of clicking on the wrong object causes your mouse hands to move involuntarily, which the system interprets as some sort of flick in whatever direction your hand moved in. Something like that. The thing is, both times it happened, I knew immediately that it had happened. I can't imagine doing it and not noticing. It is a thought, though, I suppose. I haven't searched the area of space above and around my house. His face fell. I mean, it's several million cubic meters to cover, though. Really? Rainey said, leaning in towards him a little. I decided never to bring a guest to the club ever again. Did you check your returned items folder? Indigo asked. Yes, I did, he replied. Not there. Well, that's it then, she said. I'm all out of ideas. I said, smiling. We haven't heard yet what Ed... I know, Raw blurted. Across the table from him, Indigo's hands went up instinctively. Raw had a tendency to turn chewed food into projectiles when excited. Someone hacked into your account and deleted the table. His big, victorious smile had returned. Why in God's name would someone hack into someone's account just to delete one thing? Rainey demanded. Once again, Raw said, I have no idea. Just because something's technically possible, Jennifer told him gently, doesn't mean it's probable. Actually, Deadly said, looking suddenly thoughtful, he might just have something there. He might just have something there. I split up with my girlfriend about a month ago, and it was very vitriolic. This is just the sort of thing she'd do to mess with my mind. Breakups are hard, Rainey said, putting her hand on his forearm. I had a bad one recently too. Raw punched the air. At last I solved one of these mysteries. He stood up and did a little dance on the spot. Is that meant to be the floss? Indigo asked him. You do realise it doesn't involve twerking, right? I don't care, he sang. I solved the problem, I solved the problem. Maybe you have, Raw, I said, but we still haven't heard if Edward has any thoughts on the problem. Edward? Our host waited for Raw to sit down. He leaned forward thoughtfully. Well, I'm really not sure at all, he began. All this scripting business is a little too technical for an old man like me. Scripting, said Raw. What has scripting got to do with it? Well, my boy, our guest was telling us earlier that lots of coders leave their listening scripts on all the time. And we know that the table must have had a listening script in it because it recognised carol titles. So what? What if it does? Deadly also told us that lots of coders often don't clear up the little bits of scripting they write to help them to work more effectively. Raw screwed up his face for a moment. I still don't get it, he said finally. Sorry, Edward, but I think this time the kudos goes to me. If you don't let him finish, said Indigo to him, I swear to God you'll be wearing this salad on your head. Edward laughed. Thank you, my dear, but young Raw might yet be right. It's a bit of a wild idea. I just found myself wondering if sometimes a coder might include script in something that deletes the whole object when it hears a particular phrase. Deadly nodded slowly. Actually, I've done that myself a couple of times. It saved me the bother of having to locate a particular item I wanted to get rid of when I was worried its script might interfere with the thing I was working on. I called it my kill script. I'd just type in the word kill, followed by the name of the item, and poof, it was gone. Of course, I had backup copies in my inventory. Are you suggesting I might have accidentally triggered the kill script in the table? It's a possibility, Edward said. Deadly replied, well, I'm pretty sure I never said anything like, kill the table. He laughed. I wonder, though, Edward continued, if around about the time that the table went missing, you were playing a game of, let's say, Ludo. Deadly thought for a moment. Suddenly he exclaimed, oh my God, you're right, I was. Why Ludo? I asked. Oh, that was just a guess, my boy. The first game I could think of that doesn't use 2 dice, but 1 die. My slogan, cried Deadly. I assumed a man with your passion for board games couldn't possibly have announced dice, table, roll at the commencement of a game with only 1 die. Die, table, roll, Dudley said, smiling as he shook his head. But most importantly of all, said Edward, die, table. And that was The Vanishing Table. That was the 7th story in the Avatar Dining Club Mysteries. So there you are. So that's what that gives you a taster of how the stories go. That's there's a different kind of twist concerning some quirk of Second Life in each of those stories. And so I published a book of 12 of them. I think that was in 2019, which I was just reading from the physical copy there. So that's all 12 stories, and actually I've just recently finished a 13th story. I'm probably going to publish that on my blog quite soon. So keep an eye out for that if you decide that you enjoy them. I mean, I think, Julie, when I was thinking about you know, well, in the past when I've thought about doing some reading stuff in voice, quite a lot of my stories include Second Life dialogue, and to be honest with you, that doesn't really translate well into voice recordings. But I think that these stories they're quite compact. They're quite self-contained, and they last about 20 minutes. So I think they're pretty good for a podcast. Yeah, maybe plays on machinima. That's a bit more work though than I'm prepared to put in. Anyway, that's me done. So I think there's somebody else coming along at 3 p.m. Well, Saffia, you see, Asimov prided himself on making each kind of story solvable, each mystery solvable. He wanted all of his stories to be, in theory, solved by the reader before it got to the resolution at the end. And so that's what I've kind of tried to do in all of my stories. I don't know whether I don't know to what extent they are solvable. And I will add that Asimov wrote, I think it was like 66 stories over his lifespan of the Black Widowers Dining Club, and of those 66 stories, I managed to solve just one of them before it got to the reveal. So I'm not entirely sure that his estimation of how much the reader had taken in his perspective, but it might just be that I'm just quick on the uptake. Who knows?
I don't think so. Yes, it's lovely because you then look back and think, oh my God, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, he said he was dyslexic earlier, or
Yeah.
he actually spelled out how he introduced his games. That was brilliant.
Well, I think it's I don't want it to be kind of like a magic wand ending where somebody thinks up something and you think, well, how on earth does that work? I think there's a responsibility on the writer to put at least a couple of clues.
Yes. That was great. And I liked the interaction between the different people around the table too.
Yeah, well, it gives me a chance to just, in the lead up to the presentation of the problem, it kind of gives me a chance to play a little bit with, with some Second Life humour and some Second Life issues and interactions.
I was laughing at Leonard's resolution never to take a live guest to an event again because he got flirted with.
That's right. And in kind of stories, that was story 7. So in stories 7 to 12, each story is still self-contained, but there's a very, very minor kind of story arc that starts with that story in terms of Leonard's slight crush on Rainey, which kind of develops a little bit, but obviously I won't give out any spoilers.
Yes. I hope you will make a second collection because I think they're just such fun. I can imagine they're a bit of work to write such a twisty form of fiction.
Well, I mean, usually what happens is I come up with the mechanism for the twist first of all, and I realised, that could make possibly a good Avatar Dining Club story, and so then obviously I try and kind of construct a story backwards over that. So it's really the number of stories I write is mostly dependent upon the number of twists that I manage to work out, or that occur to me, or that people tell me about. Because sometimes the most recent story I've written, the 13th one, for example, that kind of came about during a conversation that I was having with Kate, just over a possible mistake that somebody could make when they were communicating. Right, there we go. That's my next story. I just need to construct a plot around it now.
Right.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much for coming to this reading. I hope that we'll be able to have you back next year, if you're willing.
I'd be delighted if you're not sick and tired of the sight of me. Yeah, certainly.
Well, we want you at the film festival to launch the trailer of your new film.
Right, yes, okay. Yeah, okay. No pressure there.
No pressure, no. Sandra was talking today about making a whole web series before next year so that we could launch it here. But that's quite ambitious.
Just a little bit. But go for it, why not?
But we're having a session tomorrow. I don't know if it's at a friendly time for you because it's going to be at 11 a.m, which is called How to Make a Machinima. And the idea of it is we're going to discuss the techniques we use to make our machinimas.
Okay.
So I don't know if you'd be around at 11 a.m. tomorrow.
11 a.m. I need to do the maths in my head and work out what that is in UK time. So it's
7 p.m.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's 7 p.m. is always a possibility, but never a definite for me. So I've made a note of that, and if it's a possibility, then I will come in for that. Will that be here?
Yes.
Okay. Excellent.
It'd be lovely to have you on the panel.
Brilliant. Thank you. And I think I saw Boudica earlier on. So hi, Boo.
Yes.
And I'm going to get down so that